gentlemen, thank you all so much for being over here. It's such a pleasure to see you. As Mahesvari said, I am going to be talking to you a little bit about the Kamasutra. I just want to start by saying, as we go along in the talk, I'm going to tell you a great deal more about it, but I want to start by saying that most people think, this is the biggest misconception, is that there is just the one Kamasutra. There isn't. There are several thousand of these texts. There are several thousand Shastras, erotic texts from ancient India. And that's because every single king who ever came to the throne in his little kingdom would have a copy of the Kamasutra commissioned. Every single king had one commissioned because they believed that if two people could share truly mutually pleasurable intimacy, truly mutually pleasurable, then that relationship would become stable. And once all the relationships start to become stable, society becomes stable. And when society becomes stable, the kingdom becomes stable. And so today's talk is really about national security. Take notes. And not just national security, it actually does delve a little bit further into every aspect of our lives, as we will find out. So I want to start you off with a story. Now, the thing about the Shastras, the Kamasutra in particular, it's a treatise, not a book that you could just open up and read, even if you could read Sanskrit. I tried learning how to read Sanskrit. My professor then said to me, they said, if you're trying to learn how to read Sanskrit in order to read the Kamasutra, don't bother, because this was written about 2,000 years ago. It's written in ancient Sanskrit, in literary Sanskrit. Modern-day Sanskrit isn't the same. So it wouldn't really help. But also, it's a treatise. It's written in metaphor, which means that, I've been working on it for 24 years, and I'm still working on it. Because every little word that comes up has its own little story, and I want to tell you some of those stories as we go along, and that's why it is so misrepresented, because people don't actually understand what those things stand for, and that's some of the stuff that I want to bring to you today. Many, many years ago, I heard this amazing story. So the story we think goes back to about the 5th, 6th century, and it's about this little kingdom on the eastern side of India where there is a famine. And this famine has been going on now for 3 years. There is the king of this kingdom, and he's a wonderful man. He's devout, he's good, he's charitable. He does everything for everybody. His people are really, really happy with him. So much so, he's such a devout man that the holy men, the sages from every other kingdom have come and settled down in his forests because he does so much charity for them. But in spite of that, there is a famine in that kingdom. 3 years later, the king is starting to get worried because they've tried everything. They've tried every prayer under the sun, and there is no rain. Finally, after 3 years, the king goes out, and he finds this particular sage who was particularly well known. He was famous for being able to bring rain. The sage arrives, surveys the land, and then he says to the king, he says, the problem is, there's been too much prayer in this kingdom. Your sages, your holy men have burnt up the earth with their prayers. Where has been the pleasure to cool it down? And so he institutes a 3-day festival of love. 3 days of a love festival. Everybody in the kingdom is told that they have to participate. Everybody takes part. Courtesans are brought in from every other kingdom. And guess what? The rains came. The rains came. So I love this story, and I see no reason why we shouldn't be telling the story, but I did not understand why, for instance, Valentine's Day would have the power to change the climate, because that's the only love festival I know of. I then discovered many, many years later, because like I said, it's a process. Every little bit of this understanding is a long and tedious process. So the 5th century, 5th, 6th century, is where we have the first documented plague. And it was also a pandemic. It apparently also started quite far east, they say around China, and actually spread as far as Italy. So there is a pandemic at this point, and Italy is very badly affected. And the Catholic Church say that it is because of the Roman emperors, their unbridled lust. And this is the punishment of the gods. This is the wrath of the gods. In ancient India, however, they believed that when you have natural disasters like famine or floods or earthquakes, it is because the earth has forgotten her own pleasure. Mother Earth needs to be reminded what it feels like to feel pleasure, to have the sap run through her veins, to feel that tingling in her veins. And that's when everything remains good. And I love that idea. So the love festivals of ancient India were not about couples. They were actually supposed to be to bring the earth to her pleasure so that we could all live in peace. So really, again, I love the idea that climate change really depends on a woman's pleasure as well. And so we are really in a good space. I mean, this is the time to really bring back all of these narratives. So we had a whole lot of ancient love festivals, which have all been lost. And the reason they've been lost is the Kamasutra mentions them. We have no texts on them anymore, because these were generally conducted by women. These festivals were conducted by women. There was no caste distinction, because women and their friends were their friends, their maids, the women who worked with them, and so on. So it was a casteless kind of grouping. And they would perform these festivals. They weren't done by Brahmins. They were not performed by important men who would get lots of money for it. So these texts were not translated, unfortunately. And so we're trying to bring them back very slowly. But as I said, I love the idea that I come from a land where, at least at some time in our lives, we believed that pleasure is an energy. It is a Shakti. And it is so inherently important to our being. And that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about today, because I think that this is the one thing that we've lost. I always think it's amazing, because the Kamasutra was written in about 300 and something AD. We don't have an exact date for it. But it's written at the exact same time as the first ecumenical council of the Catholic Church. So they set up somewhere in Turkey in 325 AD. And by 342 AD, they have actually passed their first law banning oral sex, banning anal sex. It's actually a written law, because this is not for reproduction, it's just for pleasure. So this is banned. And at the same time, across the oceans, on the banks of the river Ganges, Vatsyayan, who we think is the author of the Kamasutra, is sitting over there, and he's writing the Kamasutra. And he's talking about the importance of pleasure, and the importance of raising pleasure inside you, and the importance of feeling pleasure. The two strains of knowledge have grown up parallel, and we are kind of stuck in a sort of twilight zone between that, between it's bad, it's sinful, it's guilty, it's a good thing, and we should all be doing it. And at some point, I guess it was bound to happen, and now is our time. So we are now talking about the importance of pleasure. So, as I said, we, as a society in India, growing up, I am now 62 years old. I grew up in post-colonial India. We were never taught any Indian texts at all. But specifically, the Kamasutra was never taught then. It is still not taught now, because it is believed that it is a book about positions, which, of course, it's not. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. How I came to it, however, is I work with stories, because I believe that stories are the most powerful tool of influence. You know, you tell stories of a man coming home drunk. We tell stories a lot like this. A man coming home drunk, and he beats up his wife, but she's such a good woman. She's such a good woman. She never says anything to him. She never dishonors him outside. She never talks about it outside. So now we've created the identity of the good woman as the one who will be silent. So the one who now speaks up is the bad person. So I've always worked with stories. They're very powerful. And at some point, growing up, we would listen to a lot of the stories that are told. And man, did they bother me. I mean, I used to have nightmares. I think the very first story I remember hearing about women, particularly, is the story about a woman called Renuka. Renuka was supposed to be so chaste. She was so pure. We told a lot of stories about purity and chastity. We told a lot of stories about how before you get your period, you're very pure. And then you are polluted, you're dirty. And unfortunately, that's still a story that exists. And so women, from the time they start their period to the time they finish it, when they're at their most powerful, society told us, this is when we are polluted. We're really not good enough. I want you to bring back your energies into your time now, ladies, no matter what age you are, and gentlemen. But specifically in this case, I am addressing the ladies because this is where the power has been taken away. Remember, we're taking back our power because we are amazing. No, honestly. Thank you. So as I was saying, Renuka was supposed to be so chaste that they say that she could carry water in an unbaked pot. Yeah, there are all sorts of things that your chastity, the power that it gives you. Well, one day, Renuka goes to the river to fill water, and there is a young man bathing over there. And she sees him. And the story tells us that she looks at him. She doesn't do anything. She looks at him. But in looking at him and becoming aware of the fact that there was a man there with a body, with a physical body, her chastity is gone. And her pot, her ghada, breaks. And her husband says, the fact that the pot is broken, it means that she is now an adulteress. And he tells his sons to kill their mother. So the older three sons refuse, the younger one agrees to do it. Because we are told that he knows that his mother hadn't actually done anything wrong, and so she will be brought back to life. And I find this story most objectionable, because if she hadn't done anything wrong, why would you do this to any woman? I'm sorry, bringing back to life is not an option. But the fact that, and the story is that, because a father's wish cannot be put aside. And this is what I mean. If you tell stories like this, where is the chance that you're going to grow up thinking any differently? So I had this major problem with the stories. But as we worked through them, in whatever we told about stories, whether it was about purity and chastity or not purity and chastity, the one thing that we never talked about was a woman's right to her own body. Her body was always somebody else's property, and her pleasure was always dependent on somebody else's permission. And so I went out looking for these stories because I believe that the stories we tell define our identity. They define who we are, our role in society, the good woman, the bad woman, the chaste woman. And if we want to create change, we have to start telling different stories. We have to change the stories. You can make as many laws as you want. You can get up there and talk about it. The only time something changes is when you tell different stories. And so I went out to explore the Kamasutra, and I had thought at that point, much like most people, it's a book about positions and maybe a little bit more. And I thought I would do a 5,000-word essay and move on. And 24 years later, I'm still working on it. Because I found that it is the most incredible set of texts. The ancient Indian erotic texts are not like the erotic texts from China or Japan or Persia, because they all have, every ancient civilization has them. But the ancient Indian ones are absolutely exquisite. They're refined, they're elegant, they're beautiful in their language. Every single thing, even the clitoris, is referred to as the Madan Chhatri, the umbrella of the love god. I love it. The vagina is the Chandan Mahal, the sandalwood palace. And I always think, compared to today, every single part of the woman's body, particularly her sexual organs, are a cuss word. That's what you use for abusive language. And like, I think Naomi Wolf said this at one point. She said, imagine a girl growing up in today's society, hearing her body, her pleasure described in these kind of words, imagine how differently we would grow up. Imagine the different level of self-esteem. I mean, if I grew up thinking that the well-being of the universe depended on my pleasure, man, I would think of myself differently. You know? Rather than thinking, oh my God, I'm this dirty person that needs to be shut away. I think it'd be very difficult to turn the Sandalwood Palace into a cuss word. You know what I mean? Teri chandan mahal ki to. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that would be possible, right? So anyway, my idea was, I wanted to bring back the narrative. I wanted to change the stories that we're telling literally by changing the vocabulary. I want to tell you a few stories from the Kamasutra. But the first thing that I want to tell you is that most people don't actually know what the Kamasutra is about. So very quickly, Kamasutra is one text. It was written in about the 300s, maybe mid-300s. It is written in 7 sections. A lot of people ask me, which is the original version, the original translation? There is no such thing. Vatsyayana, when he writes it, in his introduction, he says that he hasn't written anything new. He's taken stuff from books written about 1,000 years before, and he's copied and pasted the bits that he likes. So he's written things, and each section, each of the 7 sections, is taken from a different author. So there is no such thing as original. Because as you move on in the centuries, and it gets rewritten and rewritten and rewritten many times, those authors take some of the bits from what Vatsyayana writes, then they take some of the reference material from going back further, so it's a little bit fluid. The 7 sections, the first section, so the book was essentially written for rich men of wealth and leisure, who had the time to indulge in beautiful things. The first section is on how to build your house. So it tells the men where to locate the house. So by the river would be good. How many bedrooms you must have. If you have a mistress, you have your bedroom in the front of the house. If you have a wife, you have the bedroom in the back of the house. All sorts of weird things. How many beds in each bedroom? Any guesses? 1? 2? 5? No, I think that's a bit much. Okay, but yeah, basically 2 or 3 beds in each bedroom, because you had foreplay on one bed, you had sex on another bed, and then you did not sleep on the bed on which you had your sex, so then you slept on the 3rd bed. Because it changes the energy. The Kamasutra talks about the 64 skills, and those are not 64 ways of having sex. They are literally different things that you were supposed to learn, be interested in, and it ranges from singing and dancing and music to learning foreign languages to doing word riddles and puzzles to botany to zoology to mineralogy to cock and quail fighting. I will tell you about that. But the idea was that you had all of these different things as part of what you knew, not because you were supposed to know all these things, but because it developed your personality. Because the more exciting, the more diverse you are as a person, the more exciting you become, the more desirable you become as a lover. And I think that's the most important thing to take away from this talk, is that if you really wish to be desirable, you need to become a more exciting person that other people want to hang out with. It's got nothing to do with how you look or what size you are or what size your waistline is. It is about how interesting you can be, how much time I could spend with you and want to spend with you. But anyway, one of the skills is something called Shayan Rachanam. Shayan Rachanam literally means the art of making the bed. There's actually an entire section there which says that as the woman, you folded the bed sheets in such a way that you could tell your lover, you could tell your partner what your mood was that day. Whether you were welcoming them angry, happy, or indifferent. I know a friend of mine once said, I would just keep a dagger on the pillow. But yeah, they would get the message. No, but the point was that sex, intimacy, pleasure, it's supposed to be pleasurable. Intimacy is supposed to be something that you both feel equally pleasurable about. You feel good about it. And that always comes down to communication. And we take the word communication very lightly because we're like, oh, we use it so often. Yes, yes, you must communicate. Nobody really does. Very few people actually even talk about it. But this was amazing because you could actually non-verbally communicate. Now you had done your bit. Your lover now had to make sure that he approached you accordingly. And I think it is so amazing. Yes, maybe it's not the most practical thing in the world to be able to do this each time, but imagine if we could build that communication into our lives. I think it's incredible. I do believe that the text has so much to teach us. But anyway, as I was saying, that the first section of the Kamasutra tells you how many beds you should have, because beds were very important. The second, it even tells you how many hours the man must spend talking to his minor birds and parrots. 2 hours, in case you're wondering, every day. I don't know if that was supposed to teach men how to converse better. I really don't know. But yeah, apparently 2 hours a day. Section 2, it's the only section that I'm really interested in, is the section on pleasure. And we'll come back to that in a minute. Section 3 was on how to find the perfect wife. And the perfect wife had to be chosen from a number of strange ideas. Like it says, if the name of the wife, the name of the woman ended with a R or a L, you shouldn't marry her. No idea why. There's a lot of things it does not explain. It says that if the name of the woman is the same as a tree, a mountain, or a river, don't marry her. Honestly, I don't know why they have these criteria. But basically, Section 3 is on how to find the perfect wife. Section 4 was on how to make sure that you marry this woman once you found her. Because it wasn't just a case of, as most people think, oh, arranged marriages, you see a photo and you're going to get married and you don't see each other. You had to make her fall in love with you. You had to make her desire you. So Section 4 is actually about how to send her messages, who to employ to send her messages. Because if you employ a particular woman who's being paid more by another man to take those messages, she's not going to do you any favors. So there's an entire section on that. Section 5 was on how to seduce another man's wife. It was about politics. It was about the fact that if her husband was very powerful, you got to his power through her. So that was Section 5. Section 6 is on courtesans. Now, this is a time which is for the Indians amongst the audience. You'll know that there's a text called the Shastra. So Chanakya, who is generally known as the Indian Machiavelli, he had, at this point, made prostitution legal. And there were a lot of laws around sex work. It was so widespread and so important that it's actually incredible. There was a ministry for it. There were ministers for it. I think that you have that here, right? In Holland, you have a ministry. Sex work is legal here. Yes. And I'm sure that there is a government ministry for it as well. Yes, so there were a lot of laws, including slightly more poetic laws, I think, including the fact that what kind of jewelry was permitted to, and that was another thing. Anything else, if you were going to punish that particular woman for something that she had maybe not done or done, you could take away all her property. You could put her in prison. The only thing you could not confiscate of hers was her jewelry, because that was very important to her lovemaking. And we'll come to that in a minute as well. Very important lesson for everybody to learn. So that's Section 6. Section 7 is the stupidest section of all. It's on love potions and lotions. Honestly, it is the most pointless. It's where it says, if you mix the eye of a newt with a bat wing and then you put it with some cream onto your penis and it'll make every woman fall in love with you, it doesn't. I just want to put it out there. It does not work. And I think you'd notice it from the smell. You'd want to run the other way. But yeah, so that's the Kamasutra. Now, the few things, so the very first thing that I learned was about perfume. And it was quite incredible because, like I said, it was a journey. So I discovered that perfume was an actual art form that you had to study. So every part of the body had to be fragranced with a different perfume. Yeah, every part of the body. And these are natural perfumes, so it's not like picking up Chanel and going, it's like the natural perfumes. So the head had to be with something really earthy and strong. The neck was supposed to be something really gentle and innocent, because it was like, come closer, I don't bite, or at least not all the time. If it was a tiny area like the belly button, it had to have a strong perfume, so you drew your lover down to you. If it was a larger area, like the curve of the waist, you had something really, really light, like the essence of roses, except obviously 2,000 years ago in India, we did not have roses, but similar to that. Because you would have to press your face into the waist to be able to smell that. And the line says that this is a road that every lover must travel. The perfume just makes sure that the journey doesn't end too soon. And I think that is just such a delightful idea. The back, which is my favorite, the back wasn't ever supposed to be rubbed over with perfume. It had to be dotted. So you did little dots. So you almost created like a trail for your lover to follow. And you finished it wherever you wanted to finish it. And I just think that it is so utterly exquisite, this idea. And much later I discovered, because I was just blown away with the idea of just doing this, I think it's fantastic. Gradually you discover that it is not so much just about the perfume, which of course is fantastic, but it was about that ritual of getting dressed. A lot of times we get women coming in saying, I have really low libido, just not interested anymore. It's because when we go back to ancient times, it was seen as something special, and you ornamented yourself, you dressed yourself for it, you prepared yourself for it. Today, it's more a case of you wash off your makeup, you put on an old nightie, you turn off the light, and it's really not going to leave you feeling quite as excited. The libido needs something to feed on. So this was that ritual, as you dress yourself, it gets you more excited, gets your energy up just a little bit more. And I think that it was amazing. And I was so happy with just that bit of the explanation. But like I said, everything is so deep. Everything means so much more. It wasn't even only that. This is a technique for bringing you into the present, or for keeping you in the present. So for instance, your lover is amazing and believes that they must kiss you every single time, down your entire body. It's fantastic. But after a little while, after a few months, it becomes a ritual, it becomes a routine, and you start to zone out. So by the time you get to that curve of the waist, you're now thinking, did you sign that draft? Did you send off the email? You started to zone out a little bit. But each time you move from one part of your body to the other and a different perfume hits you, it brings you back to the present. And so perfuming was really, really important. They even used to perfume the room in stratas. So the floor level, because you have to remember that at the time that the Kamasutra was written, there is not furniture as we know it. So a lot of the beds would have been on the floor. Floor level was fragranced with a different perfume. Kneeling level with a different one. Standing level with a different perfume, and so on. And yes, I know it sounds like so much hard work, but I just want you to understand that they were really trying to delve into the idea that pleasure is not just something that you do and you get it over with. It's about building up the senses. And even if you don't do it physically, it's got to be over here in the head. You've got to be able to have that in your mind to be able to build it up. And so, how they fragrance themselves becomes important. So for instance, in the morning you would wash your hair, you'd apply the ittar, the perfume, whatever it was, to your scalp, and then you would tie up the wet hair and leave it like that. And by the evening, when you've let your hair down, it would be like this cloud of perfume that enveloped you. It was the same with the rest of your body. So it wasn't the perfume, it was your perfume mixed with your perspiration. It was your scent. It was very, very special. So it wasn't just that you were smelling Chanel on me. You were smelling me with the Chanel. You know what I mean? So that was the very first thing that I discovered, and I realized that perfume actually has an incredible impact on us. And I always advise people, not only should you really, really enjoy the different fragrances, whether you're trying to put something different on your pillow, there's lots of lovely linen fragrances that you can get for your pillow, whether you actually put something into your handbag, just buy a really nice perfume just for your handbag, so every time you open it, you get this whiff. It just lifts your spirits. Put some into your shoes. It's fantastic. I mean, for many, many different reasons, but the most basic one, it makes your feet feel happy. It just makes your nerve endings in your feet actually feel happy. So as I said, that was the first thing that I discovered, and I was hooked. The second thing that I discovered was about the jewelry. Ladies and gentlemen, and all our non-binary guests, you know, this was where the tide changed. The tide turned. I'm a storyteller. I hate the thought of writing. This is when I thought, I have to write a book because this cannot be lost again. So I discovered that in our ancient literature, we never ever refer to a position by itself. We refer to it through a piece of jewelry. There is a different piece of jewelry for every position. And it's not because we were being all prudish and saying, oh, we won't talk about this. We'll just say, oh, you know. No. It's because women were taught how to perform these positions by how the jewelry moved on their body. So, as we probably know, unfortunately, there is no way of actually understanding. You read up about something and it tells you, put your arms over here, put your legs over here, and then you do this, but nobody really knows what you should be doing. And the only way that you learn it is from porn, where you can watch it. And I know that they're trying to change the trajectory of porn now, but this is still something that they haven't quite understood. So men were taught how to perform positions by teaching them about battle positions. Okay, so each battle position was linked to an actual lovemaking position. And the reason for that is because they say that men can get involved physically, but their brain doesn't get involved as easily. So the battle position told you, this is the time that you go in. This is where you're seeing the enemy, so you actually stop. This is where the element of surprise comes in. This is where you rush in. This is where you breathe again, and so on. So men were taught through battle positions. Women were taught through jewelry. So for instance, if the woman was going to be on top, which, by the way, in the ancient world, in the rest of the ancient world, was absolutely taboo. It was not permitted. It was actually considered a position of power. So women were not allowed to do this. In Judaic mythology, there is Lilith. She's supposed to have been Adam's first consort. And she says to him at one point, I am made from the same mud as you. I can be on top. And she's thrown out of paradise and she's made into a demoness. So Lilith in our mythology is a demoness. The Kamasutra says you could be on top, but to be on top, you only move your hips. You don't move the rest of your body. And so women would wear a jingling girdle around their upper waist, lots of little bells on it. And then you had to make sure that the bells did not make a sound. When I first read this, when I first discovered it, I did not read it. It was a case of discovering it. I remember first thinking, oh my God, my knees won't be able to take that. Because when you watch any of the woman on top positions in pornography, you just see the woman bouncing up and down. That's how it's always shown. And I realize it's for camera, so they have to have the action, I guess. They have the bounce, bounce, bounce. There is no pleasure for a woman in the bounce, bounce, bounce. Literally, there isn't. The way to do it was that actually now if you're on top and you're wearing this and you're trying not to make the ghungroos, the bells jingle, you learn how to move back and forth just at the right pace and the right motion. And now you're only focusing on that. You're not worrying about what you're doing or not doing right. But that was supposed to be the ultimate in pleasure for the woman as well as for her partner. And I think that is so incredible that we could actually have a time when it was understood. I mean, not just was it understood that this is what the woman needed, but it was understood that how do you appeal to her mind to make her feel that excitement that she really wants to do this? And you actually appeal to her through the most exquisite vocabulary of saying, let's move the jewelry as it is needed. And I think this is where I feel that this text needs to be brought back, because it actually appeals to the right part of our brain. It talks to us in a way where I'm not freaking out thinking, oh my God, this is so graphic. What am I doing over here? I don't want to be listening to this. It can actually get my brain tingling. It can get me thinking, I want to try that. I mean, the very first time I tried wearing a jingling girdle, made a lot of noise. I cheated. I put on music. It was easier. So we were actually talking about how we can bring the narrative around to make sure that you include emotions, you include desire, you include the things that you feel when you're with your partner or before you're with your partner. Our ancient texts literally talked about love in every single one of its forms. So it talks about the Naika, the woman who is waiting for her lover. The Naika who is so happy that her lover is over there. The Naika, the woman who is now so sad because the lover has gone away. But it also talks about the woman who says, he's come and he's bloody well overstayed, and why isn't he going yet? Because that is also one of our things. I mean, my husband, when he retired, I was like, why are you at home all the time? You know, that time to yourself is equally a part of that love and to keeping that love alive. So the next thing I want to talk about is love bites. As I said, every single thing has been made into a bigger story than it is. So that when you come down to the basics, you carry a narrative in your head. A love bite is a hickey. Yeah, everybody knows it's a hickey. But if I bring the whole romance of the story with me, I'm suddenly looking at it. They basically, love bites, this is a courtly society, the time of the Kamasutra, it's a courtly society. Love bites were made to be seen. So you did not just go around giving your lover love bites because you were feeling excited. It was a skill that had to be learned. And there were rules around love bites. So if you had bad teeth, you were not allowed to give your lover love bites. If you had chipped teeth, it would bring dishonor to both you and your partner. So you weren't allowed to have to give love bites. What's really interesting is that the Kamasutra is the only ancient erotic text that talks at such length about dental hygiene. And I thought, quite honestly, that it talks so much about dental hygiene because we believe that the goddess of learning and music and speech, Saraswati, sits on the tongue. So this is the home of the goddess, hence you must keep your mouth in a beautiful condition. Wrong. The Vedic scholars, so if you were a student of the Vedas, it tells us in the Rig Veda, if you're a student of the Vedas, you were not allowed to ever brush your teeth. They had the foulest, filthiest teeth ever. You were not allowed to brush your teeth. There is a story from about 1100 AD where the guard goes and tells Raja Bhoj, who's the king of the kingdom, and he says, you know, those people have come to see you. And the king says, which people? And he says, oh, you know, those people who have teeth like kidney beans, because they were so filthy. So the brushing of the teeth was important if you were a lover. It was for lovers. If you were on your period as a woman, you were not supposed to be brushing your teeth at that time. It was, yeah, there were all sorts of rules, but if you were going to be making love, and you wanted that lovemaking to go well, so much so that, you know, they used to use twigs in those days to brush their teeth. It was your priest that picked the twigs for you. Depending on the phase of the moon, depending on who you were going to be with, they would pick certain types of twigs. They would freshen them in certain types of syrups. It was a huge deal. And I want to tell you that, yes, anybody with bad teeth, anybody with bad breath, your chances of being a good lover seriously go down. I would focus on that first, really. Forget the perfume, let's start there. And the same thing, so there was love bites. Each bite had its own shape, its own message, its own occasion. So you could literally send love bites as a gift. Men or women could put it on the petals of a flower, and then it became like a love letter, because each one had its own message. And it's the same with love scratches. You know, the different types of scratches on different parts of the body. And one of my favorite stories, I'm going to tell you this one story, tell you one other thing, and then I'm going to wrap up, I promise. But one of my favorite stories is of this woman who's a courtesan, and this man who comes to her regularly. And one day he comes to her, and as they make love, she smells the perfume of another woman on him. She starts to get fascinated by this other woman. Because as I said, if every part of the body has a different perfume, it depends on what you have been doing and for how long, and what perfume have you left on what part of your lover. So as she smells the perfume, she starts to get fascinated by the other woman. And so she starts to leave messages on the man's body with love bites and love scratches for the other woman. And eventually the other woman picks it up, and she starts to respond. And they never meet, but they have the most intense affair. They explore each other's bodies through his body. And I just think it's a seriously sexy story, because there is no judgment over here of the woman's pleasure or what the hell is she doing. It's just about her pleasure. I mean, I realize the man is probably really badly scratched up by now. But he's probably also very happy scratched up, because he's got these two women who are so passionate at that point. Yes, I just had to share that story with you. And finally, there is this wonderful chapter in the Kamasutra about lovers' quarrels. It says that all couples must fight. And not just, you said, all-out fights. Scream, shout, throw things, break things. There are a couple of rules. It is the woman who gets to have the tantrum, and it is the man who has to do the making up. Yeah, I like this one. And he's not allowed to say, well, I already said sorry, how many times you... No. You keep apologizing till she's ready to forgive you. Yep. That's what the master himself said. And it says that as the woman, you can do anything. You can throw stuff, you can break stuff, you can scream, yell, shout. The only thing that you're not allowed to do is you're not allowed to run out of the house. You can get as far as the door, but you cannot go out. And the reason for that is that once you go out, one is, of course, if he doesn't follow you immediately, that's seriously problematic. But also, it had to finish with what they say, him taking her feet to his head. Now, in today's vocabulary, we think that taking the feet to the head means that you're going to be apologizing. That's not it. That was actually a metaphor for making love. A man only ever took a woman's feet to his head if they were lovers. And I discovered this, like I said, again, after many, many years of trying to figure this one out. The first time I read it was in Kalidas's Kumar Sambhavam, so the story of where Lord Shiva and the goddess Parvati get married. And when Parvati is being dressed for her wedding, and it describes how, her maids put all the perfume on her, and they put the saffron on her, and they put the sandalwood on her, and they beautify her, and right at the end, they paint the underneath of her feet with alta, with red paste. And then they giggle to each other, and they say, now let's see how he takes these feet to his Chandrama, to his moon, the crescent moon that he wears in his head. And I always thought, why is he going to take her feet to his head? Well, it's so much later that I discovered that one of the most popular positions was where the woman would be underneath with her feet over here on the man's shoulders. And at this point, her alta, her red paste, would rub off on the man's forehead. And it's very difficult to remove. Anybody who's ever worn alta will know that it can take weeks for it to come off. So if you ever saw a man walking around with a bit of that, you knew what he'd been doing. And from there, it became a metaphor. So when you're fighting, the idea is that he has to finish by taking your feet to his head, by make-up sex, essentially. And that cannot be done outside. So it had to be that you finish it indoors. But I do recommend, ladies and gentlemen, that all-out good, really screaming fights are so good for you. So don't hold yourself back. I have many, many other things that I'm going to tell you about when we go into our Q&A, but at least for starters, I hope you enjoyed those stories. Thank you all.